Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. Strong finish to our week, which is not quite the same thing as you might say for the Georgia basketball team. But either way, we're glad to have you here today, getting ready for spring practice next week. Georgia will be in the NCAA tournament field, we believe, on Sunday. We'll preview that a bit. SEC continues to rattle about what its future might be. We are covering all of that here today. And we plan on, as I said, going into the weekend on a very strong note, although I will tell you I'm in a miserable mood today, just absolutely horrendous mood. You know, you get used to like the really nice spring weather, and all of a sudden now it's like scraping ice off the car in the morning and stuff like that. It's just like, oh gosh, can we please get out of this winter before it's all said and done? But whatever it is, we're here for and glad to have you with us as well. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
We made a solemn vow to you year or so ago that we would remain a Cavender-free show. You may remember when the famous twins would be in photographs all the time with Carson Beck. We said we're more than happy to cede those clicks to somebody else. And I'm sure there's plenty of clicks to be had from what the gals were doing and Carson Beck was doing with them. But we said that can be somebody else's lane. We'll stay in our lane. I will tell you today, we remain a Cavender-free zone, even though it's now a different figure associated with Georgia football. In some photographs, at least, I think these are real, with the Cavenders. We remain a Cavender-free zone, and we remain. For anybody else on the internet who want to scoop this $100 bill off the ground, we remain Cavender-free. We remain willing to cede that content over to whoever might want to go after it, and I'm sure plenty of people will. Instead, here's what we're going to talk about here today. I had planned on, and if you don't know, there was a picture of Kirby with the Cavenders. I guess the Cavenders are down there. Apparently, there are big doings going on down in the Bahamas. Kirby's had himself quite a week down there, apparently, at least based on the photographic evidence that we have seen. But, you know, we also try to respect privacy a little bit, too. So we'll let him enjoy his spring break, and we'll obviously get to the business of football next week. Either way, speaking of spring practice for Georgia football, we had planned all week to conclude the week this week by looking ahead to what's going to happen next week, because it is on and everybody's going to be going after it next week, trying to figure out our first glimpse at what the Georgia Bulldogs for 2026 are going to look like. And one of the things that we have been doing in preparation for that, I've mentioned this to you here on the air, I've mentioned this with a couple of guests. In my mind, there have been three big questions ahead of Georgia before spring practice starts next week. And yet, every time I bring this up, somebody always brings up a fourth thing to go along with that. This happened with Connor Riley the other day. It happened with Terrence Edwards yesterday, Jake Fromm a little bit on Tuesday, where I kind of rattle through my big three things, and somebody says, let me also add this fourth thing. Now, I don't know why this is true, but it is true. We have to do a headline for the show, and that's how we present the show to the audience. People see the headline, and they know we've got a show for them here on this particular day. For whatever reason, 3 questions for Georgia football just works better than 4 questions. It just does. I don't know why. There's a rule of 3 with stuff like this. You think 4 might be better than 3 because more is always better than less. But actually for headlines and things like that, 3 just has a nice little cadence to it. So I had planned on doing the 3 big questions as it relates to Georgia football. And yet every time I brought up my 3, somebody would also bring up a 4th. So even though it doesn't work quite as well as a headline, doesn't have quite the same, ding, ding, ding staccato rhythm to it, we're going to do 4 big questions for Georgia football here ahead of spring practice, which begins next week. Let me start with one that I believe is incredibly important, and then we'll work our way to all the rest. I think what's going to happen for the Georgia offensive line starting this spring, heading towards the fall, is fascinating, because I think this is a group that has a chance to be very, very, very good. And there was at one point in the very early days of the offseason, I think some optimism that Monroe Freeling might come back for 2026. And had Freeling come back, well, you're probably talking about, I believe, the best offensive line in America. with a healthy Ernest Green returning, bookending the one side, with Freeling back, manning left tackle, with what you have on the interior. You would have had both Gaston and Glover as guards. You would have had, when he returns to full health, Drew Bobo at center. That's a potential All-American. That's the best offensive line in America. I just don't think there'd be, much concern about that. I think you would be as good up front as anybody would be. Well, it's totally understandable that Monroe Freeling's going to the NFL, because when you see how he tests the NFL scouting combine, he is clearly going to be a very attractive draft prospect. We totally understand that he left. We wish him well in his endeavors. And yet you go from saying, okay, well, you would have been best offensive line in America, and I truly believe that Georgia would have had a very strong chance of being that, to now you are probably pretty good, but you've got an issue you've got to figure out. With Freeling not here, what happens to that left tackle spot? Does Juan Gaston kick out and play there? Does Georgia get somebody else there? Does Ernest Green flip-flop and come over to that side? Does Ekene Ogboko, as an incoming freshman, does he become the guy that you trust to play right away? A little bit like you trusted Gaston and Glover at different positions last year. This is a crucial question for Georgia this spring. And this is one of those things that's almost like a keystone question, in that if you find the answer to this, all of a sudden, a lot of other good things start happening because of that. You want to be more explosive offensively? Get your offensive line figured out. You want Gunnar Stockton to have a great year? Get your offensive line figured out. You want to have Nate Frazier break through what's been a little bit of a glass ceiling for Georgia the last couple of seasons, actually have 1,000-yard rushing? Get your offensive line figured out. You get this offensive line completely figured out. And I would say it's mostly figured out in a way that has probably not been true for Georgia to begin the season the last couple of years. It's mostly figured out. But you get your offensive line fully figured out with your best five, that becomes the kind of lever that increases the productivity of the offense overall. That is a crucial question. That's something we've been hammering for quite some time. And we'll hear from Kirby Smart next week. We'll hear from some Georgia players, hearing their thoughts about what might happen, rounding out the discovery of who your best five truly is, the offensive line. There may not be anything more important than that. And yet it's not the only big question facing Georgia. We've also said this, that Georgia, pretty deep at most position groups. Returning starters, we had this for you yesterday via CBS Sports. Second most returning starters in all of college football, most in the SEC. Yet there is one very important position group where Georgia has very little in the way of returning experience. If you care about statistical production, the players responsible for that, the percentage of them back on this year's team, Georgia's not going to look great when it comes to the wide receiver position overall. Georgia needs some guys to step up. And we've been mentioning lately, who all those candidates might be, but the need is obvious. It is a big question for Georgia here this spring. And yesterday on the program, we talked to Terrence Edwards about this. And, I asked Terrence, hey, Terrence, what is something that you want to see Georgia figure out during spring practice? Where is your attention right now? Probably not a surprise that Terrence, the former wide receiver, mentioned his former position, and in doing so, also pivoted to another big question that everybody that's come on the show as a guest this week has also seemed to bring up. So as we move to the next big question for Georgia, here is Terrence on wide receiver, and another question that he thinks operates right there alongside that. This is Terrence Edwards from yesterday.
I'm looking to see which other receivers step up. I'm also looking to see Gunnar taking that next step, being able to now. We all want them to push the ball downfield more. And I think now, as a second year full starter, I think this is a big spring for Gunnar. And I would like to see which receivers step up to be the guy. I don't know who that's going to be. It could be Isaiah Kane. It could be Talon Taylor. It could be Humphreys. I don't know. But I love the group. I think it's a very talented group. Now we need to see the quarterback position take the next step, play really well this year, but I want to see Gunnar, and I know Gunnar would take that next step. And then who's going to break out to be the breakout receiver this year?
So, and as I told Terrence yesterday, the fun thing about receiver being a big question is you watch G-Day, that becomes a very easy thing to evaluate yourself, because unlike, say, battles with the interior line positions or where a safety happens to be lined up pre-snap or some of the kind of stuff like that, does the receiver create separation? Does he catch the football? Anybody can tell that. It's an easy thing to watch with just the naked eye. So if receiver's a big question going into a spring practice and eventually culminating in a G-Day, that's actually pretty fun for fans because it's the kind of thing that people can pay close attention to. They can watch for themselves. And Terrence lays out, I think, pretty clearly what we've been saying, is that Georgia's going to look to guys who haven't played either at all or not very much and say, okay, this opportunity belongs to you. Can you step up this year and do a little bit like what Zachariah Branch did a year ago? It's a very big question for Georgia. It's a hinge point that's going to determine the success for the season because Georgia seems to right now have a lot going for it ahead of the 2026 season. But if these youngish, slightly inexperienced receivers don't step up, it's all for nothing. I mean, having a great defense could end up being a moot point. Having some other things going for you offensively, that could end up being thwarted. If these receivers who Georgia's made pretty sizable bets on, if they don't step up, then a lot of what Georgia hopes to happen this year is just not going to materialize. So we think these guys have tremendous potential. We also think that Georgia has made a pretty sizable bet on them fulfilling that potential this year. There is no doubt that receiver and who does emerge as the go-to guys right there alongside what happens next for the offensive line, absent Monroe Freeling, boom, that is a very, very big question as it relates to both of those very big questions as it relates for Georgia spring practice beginning next week. And as I said, when I brought this kind of stuff up, you had Terrence doing what others have done this year, saying, and you got to put Gunnar Stockton right there with it. Now, let me tell you why I don't treat Gunnar as big of a question mark as others have on the show this week. For me, it comes down to this. I said this going into last season, that I don't need Gunnar to win the Heisman Trophy. I just need him to be the typical Georgia starting quarterback. And all things being equal, that's about what Gunnar was. The typical Georgia starting quarterback in recent years has been somebody kind of right there around top 10 in the Heisman vote, pretty good numbers, and that's basically what Gunnar Stockton was this past year. The one thing we said we'd like to see Gunnar do differently is we'd like to see a little bit more of a consistent through line from game to game. But when you put the totality of the season together, the games where he played out of his mind, combined with the games in which he probably could have played a bit better, you blend it all together. What you have is a composite performance for Gunnar that was good enough to be in the top 10 of Heisman voting this past year. It'd be great if he takes another dramatic step for next season. Obviously, we'd love that. It'd make everything about this season easier that we're about to see take place. But I really don't think that Georgia needs to have that happen. If Gunnar just shows incremental growth, if he just gets basically a year better, being a year older, I think that's probably plenty. There are other spots on the field where Georgia, and we'll get to one of these in a minute, where Georgia doesn't need incremental growth. Georgia needs probably exponential growth. Georgia needs dramatic improvement over where things have been. But the quarterback position, Georgia doesn't need dramatic improvement. And Georgia's not like, say, wide receiver or maybe what happens at left tackle, leaning on somebody who hasn't played very much. No, this is a returning starter who's already proven to be pretty good. We would say he needs to be consistently a bit better. But even if it's only slight incremental improvement for Gunnar Stockton this season, for Georgia, it's fine as long as it gets the other things that it needs here this season. As long as it answers the other questions, then even Gunnar getting a little bit better is probably fine for Georgia overall, we would say. But I also try to be fair and balanced. And as I said, Terrence Edwards, Connor Riley, other guests in the show this week, when we've brought up these questions related to spring practice, have said, hey, don't forget Gunnar Stockton's role in all of this. So in respect to those who brought that opinion up, let's not forget Gunnar Stockton's role in all this. That I've said I want to see him be more consistent. I want to see a little bit more just consistency game to game. Others have said, what about those throws deep down the field? Or not even necessarily deep down the field, just 15, 20 yards down the field. Throws beyond the line of scrimmage. How do you get more consistent? And frankly, how do you produce a larger number of those? How do you avoid the big hit that puts your ability to play at risk? All of those are the kinds of things that are in-game decision-making where you got to decide, am I going to do this or not in that given moment? And when the the former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm joined us on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger on Tuesday. I asked Jake, I said, okay, given the fact that some of what people want to see from Gunner is about a reflexive action during a game, how do you conjure that during practice when ultimately it really doesn't feel like a game? You're not doing some of the same things you do during a game. So how do you produce that when it's hard to replicate the feeling of a game during practice? This is what Jake Fromm said about that and how it relates to Gunner Stockton earlier this week.
Quarterbacks generally do not get hit until the very first game of the season, and it's just tough to replicate that feel in the pocket when guys are really trying to get after you. You're wearing a black jersey. You're not supposed to be touched, especially where Gunner's at. Man, Gunner is the starter going into next year, and it is such a tough thing to kind of get into our heads, the timing in the pocket. Hey, when do I tuck and run? Man, when do I try to stick this thing out? Because the pocket never really feels like a game day pocket until you really do get to that first football game. So it's going to be tough for Gunner to work on, but I think for him this spring, it's playing on time and having a little bit more command of throwing the football. Man, let's deliver the ball from the pocket. Develop as a thrower because we know he has all the athleticism. He has the get out of jail free card with his legs. Man, he is a tough son of a gun, and that's what everybody loves about him. It's what his teammates love about him. It's what the coaches love about him. But man, if he could take that next step, playing on time and delivering from the pocket, man, I think he'll be an incredible football player this fall and be able to take this team wherever he wants to go.
I think Jake makes an interesting point there, deconstructing it slightly. If we're worried, Gunner's probably got to find a way to protect his body a little bit more and not take so many catastrophic hits. Well, as Jake seems to be insinuating there, if you have a greater command of the offense, if you trust yourself to release the football in that offense and find those layered throws 15, 20 yards down the field, middle of the field maybe more frequently, if you feel really comfortable doing that kind of thing, if you develop that confidence in yourself during spring practice, suddenly this fall, maybe you're not tempted to run quite as much. If I'm deconstructing what Jake says, that's what I might get to on that. And I think that's probably a very fair assessment of the situation. The truth is, we like Gunner's athleticism and we want him to use it. One of the best things about him at all is the way he turns would-be negative plays into either not a loss or just a very small loss. Even on sacks sometimes, he's only losing a couple of yards because of the fact that he finds a way to get as much positive gain as he can in any situation. We like that. But we don't want him or the Georgia offense to become too reliant on that aspect of his game. We want to see Georgia little more built out when it comes to how it throws to the football to some of these receivers who are hoping to step up. And as Jake Fromm explains, this spring is a great way to build that cohesion between quarterback and wide receiver. So we are 3 questions into our preview of the big questions as it relates to Georgia. I mentioned the offensive line. I harp on that. You hear Terrence Edwards talking about wide receiver. Jake Fromm addressing what's going to happen at quarterback. One more guest this week sets the stage for the other big question that I think needs to be answered, and it's on the other side of the ball. And this is where, as I said a moment ago, if you're looking for an area in which Georgia needs dramatic improvement, not just incremental improvement, but large-scale improvement, it's on the defense up front with how you create more negative plays, how you get in the backfield and maybe produce more tackles for loss, certainly more sacks, outside the top 100 in those categories nationally a year ago. And for Georgia, that's not good enough. And if you're not more impactful up front with your defense than the depth that you have in the back 7 of your defense, well, that probably ends up being negated, and eventually you will be picked apart, as we at times saw Georgia picked apart last season. And I truly don't think, now some of this is over my head, but I feel confident in saying this, some of the defensive issues we saw from Georgia a year ago was necessarily related to, an insufficient scheme or anything related to that. I just think it was too easy for opposing offenses, opposing quarterbacks sometimes, in terms of either keeping plays alive like a Trinidad Chambliss would have done, or just being able to deliver the football without duress, the way that Ty Simpson would have been able to do in September. Quarterbacks sometimes a year ago just had way too easy of a time against UGA. And this year, that needs to change. And so on Wednesday's show when I posed to Davin Bellamy. It's no surprise here that all the former players are gravitating towards their position group or their idea of football in terms of what they're talking about. But if I asked Davin Bellamy on Wednesday, great former pass rusher at Georgia, to tell me, hey, Davin, if you could instill the message, if you could give the opening press conference, if you could give the speech about what you want Georgia to be about this season and demonstrating that this spring, what would you say? And in light of everything we just said, I thought that Davin gave a very compelling answer. This is him on Wednesday.
You know, the first thing that comes to mind is don't just make the play, change the game. And that's what a coach, told me, especially when I started getting into professional, football. Don't just get the sack. Go get the ball out and turn it into, a turnover where we get the ball. Just don't get the sack. Let's get the turnover and turn it into points. And that's what I want to see out of the Georgia defense, especially the front seven. What we know at Georgia is those guys are going to stop the run, because if you can't stop the run, you're not even going to be playing at Georgia. But the thing is, when we start getting to these situations where we need a playmaker, a guy to just change the swing of the game, and that's when you hear me, just saying a lot. I want my defensive ends to graduate from knowing the playbook and making plays to becoming playmakers. So if I'm at the Georgia, practice right now, I'm telling the defensive ends and the front seven and just the linebackers, let's make the back end job a lot, easier. But I want to see guys go get sacks, knock the ball out, tackle for losses instead of starting the series off on 2nd and 5. Why can't we start the series off 2nd and 12, 2nd and 13? But I just think the guys just got to change into their mind that, you know what, it's just not okay just to make the play. Let me go change the game.
I love that clip so much. If we chop that thing up, turned it into an NFT, I think I'd probably buy it. I love that clip so much. Can you imagine what this season would feel like if the kind of game wrecker emerged the way that Davin says he wants to see? And like I said, all of our guys are biased in their own way. Terrence loves his wide receivers. Davin loves his pass rushers. Jake loves the quarterbacks. John loves the offensive linemen. John Stinchcomb on Mondays. Everybody likes their position group, right? We're all biased in our own ways. These guys are biased towards guys who play the similar position where they just played. But that doesn't make Davin wrong right there. We feel really good about this Georgia defense. I think they're deeper at all three levels than they've probably been in a good number of years, probably since the true glory years of 2021 and 2022, I think. I think that's probably true. But how much better would it be if in the midst of this talent that's coached, as Davin said, to know the playbook and be gap sound and be where you're supposed to be and all of those fundamentals, what if in the midst of all of that, a game wrecker also emerged? And sometimes it seems like, Georgia has favored the ensemble cast over the guy who just puts the team on his back and freestyles or whatever. But boy, last year it seemed to be like that thing was just missing. What if it's not missing this year? What if, and you and I can make our list, and our list is probably pretty similar of, well, maybe it's this guy, maybe it's that guy, maybe it's whatever. What if whoever it is, what if he shows up? And what if we do get a preview of that this spring? I think that'd be incredibly fun. And I think that Davin says that very, very well. So here are the 4 questions. Question number 1, what happens for Georgia at the left tackle spot with Monroe Freeling on his way to the NFL? How does Georgia round out its best 5 along the offensive line? Question number 2, as Terrence Edwards says, who steps up and becomes the go-to receiver? That's fun for us, but we can see that with our own eyes during G-Day. It's pretty easy to evaluate who's creating separation, who's earning targets, who's actually hauling in the catches. And question number 3, to go along with what others have been saying this week, what about the next step for Gunnar Stockton? How easily does he take it, and what specifically is that next step for him for this upcoming season? We'll get previews of that this spring. And finally, to close it out, for a defense that might be back to feeling like a true Georgia defense once again, is there somebody up front within that first front 7 whether it's an edge rushing outside linebacker, a fierce defensive end, a potential first-round pick at defensive tackle? Is there the kind of game-wrecking player that can live in the backfield, that can create tackles for loss, and help improve a sack total for Georgia that a year ago was nowhere near as good as it needs to be? I think that's plenty for Georgia to work on this spring, and getting some evidence from the words that Kirby Smart uses, or glimpses during practice, or rumors and whispers, or our own evaluation at G-Day. Watching how this comes together starting next week for Georgia fans is going to be a ton of fun. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, and we are happy to have you as a part of the program here today. We love all of that, and we love the fact that Kroger's offering great things for you here right now. How about daily deals that you're not going to want to miss? Because let's face it, I don't know, man. It seems like things are getting expensive. So anytime you get a chance to save some money, of course, you want to do that. Customer Appreciation Week at Kroger is on the way. It's actually ongoing right now for what it's worth, all the way through March 17th. So happening right now through March 17th. You can go to the Kroger app. You can download daily coupons, and you can find out more online by going to Kroger.com/appreciation. That's Kroger.com/appreciation. So it's something new every day, some fun experience for you each and every day. Kroger wanting to show thanks to you for being a supporter of theirs, and obviously Kroger for a long time has been a supporter of ours. So, of course, we heartily encourage you being a part of this. So please check that out. Really fun stuff when it comes to our folks at Kroger. Make sure you check that out today. One more time, Kroger.com/appreciation. Kroger Customer Appreciation Week is ongoing right now, all the way through St. Patrick's Day. So check that out. In-store, online, or the Kroger app. Really fun stuff going on there. All right. Speaking of fun stuff, it is we had Jake Fromm on Tuesday. Another J name. Jeff Sentell coming up in a couple of minutes. Obviously been a little quiet on the recruiting front this week just because of coaches enjoying a little bit of spring break too. But getting back to that here very soon. Big pivotal moments in the 2027 class coming up before you know it. So Jeff Sentell will cover all of that with us here in just a little bit of Friday staple in our program. Jeff Sentell in just a moment. Also, before we do that, let's get ready to go around the doghouse here today, too. Around the doghouse on our program. And let's talk about a little bit of basketball here just for a moment. So yesterday, Georgia lost in the SEC tournament. Kind of an ugly affair to Ole Miss. Had a couple of things going on. You had, first of all, Georgia built a big deficit for itself at the beginning of the game, the first half. And then when you move, later in the game, there are a couple of very questionable calls on what seemed like ought to be Georgia baskets as it relates to goaltending. Santos Surreal got ejected from the game. Getting all 40 minutes from Santos proved to be a little bit of a challenge at times this year. You got a lot going on in the game. And listen, I get all of this. Certainly some of the officiating stuff was pretty controversial. Seemed like obvious calls that were not made, and there were a couple of those. And yet, if I am going to talk about what decided the game for, Georgia, you can't get down, 20 points in the first half to a team like Ole Miss, far worse than you. The second time this year, Ole Miss has beaten Georgia in basketball. And by the way, Ole Miss has become a little bit of a grizzly bear for Georgia in particular. But you can't get down so big at the beginning of the game and have it turn out in your favor. Officiating, whatever else, the culprit for Georgia in Nashville last night was the huge deficit in the first half against a team that has no business building that deficit against you, which leads me to, I think, what my overall opinion of Georgia basketball is here right now, which is I think I'm in probably a different category than some Georgia fans, and I'm fine with that. There are a lot of Georgia fans who would say, why can't my basketball team be as good as Florida is, or as good as Auburn used to be, or as good as Tennessee thinks it is? Why can't my team, football school, be as good as these other football schools that have also aspired to do big things in basketball? And I think you have every right to ask that question. And if that's your desire, you want to see Georgia have that kind of success, well, of course, you have every right to hope that and wish that and help try to prod Georgia along towards that. Rightly or wrongly, my ambitions for Georgia basketball are a little smaller than that, to be honest with you. I find the time at the end of the football season prior to the start of spring to be kind of just bland. I don't like the winner. I don't like that. I want basketball to step in and fill that void post-football, pre-spring, where it just seems like there's kind of a malaise in life. I like to have the basketball team fill that time. I don't really have a whole lot of grand aspirations for basketball beyond that. If they can keep me entertained, I'm kind of okay. I don't fault Georgia fans who say, "No, man, I want to see this be the best basketball program in the country." I don't fault you for feeling that way. You probably should feel that way. My expectations for Georgia basketball are a little smaller than that. For instance, last year, making the NCAA tournament, I thought that was a really big deal for Georgia. To be back in the NCAA tournament again this year, back-to-back trips to March Madness for Georgia, in my eyes, that's no small thing. There are a lot of you that say, yeah, but I aspire to see Georgia achieve a lot more than that. You have every right to. For me, with my more meager expectations for Georgia basketball, to be in the tournament back-to-back years, to make, for the most part, every game feel like it's worth tuning into, worth paying attention to, worth following. It is a relevant factor in the sporting landscape in our state. I think that's a pretty big deal. And so, given what Georgia's dealt with, you lose Silas Demery to UConn, you lose Asa Newell to the NBA draft, given the fact that Georgia had those things happen to it, and it's still back in the NCAA tournament, I'm pretty close to saying that Georgia for this season can hang a mission accomplished banner no matter what. I'm pretty close to saying that. But when you see what happened yesterday against Ole Miss, once again, from the lens of my relatively meager expectations for Georgia basketball, when you see what happened yesterday against Ole Miss, it does feel a little bit like, some of the stuff we've seen this season, slow starts, not ready at the tip. It seems like some of that, and it's also a little bit of a reminder of the crest that Georgia rode last season, where they get off to a great start, people were feeling great, they really cratered during conference play to the point where a lot of folks were wondering, are they going to make the NCAA tournament after the start they got off? And they finished strongly enough that was not really a question by the time you got to Selection Sunday. A lot of that from a year ago feels the same way this year too. But when you see a huge deficit against Ole Miss like it was yesterday, it also brings to mind what happened last year against Gonzaga in the first round of the NCAA tournament, where, it's great to be back in March Madness, but what was otherwise a nice accomplishment for Georgia was really soured by the fact they were run out of the gym before the game even essentially tipped off. And it really put a dour note on what was otherwise a pretty big deal for Georgia to be back in March Madness for the first time in a long time. And so I thought it was interesting yesterday to hear Mike White talk about this a bit, about the comparison with the run that Georgia went through late in the season to secure its tournament status, having to do that again a little bit this year too, and where things stand for the Dogs ahead of Selection Sunday after a very, very quick exit from the SEC tournament against a team in Ole Miss that's frankly nothing special. This is Mike White from yesterday.
I think we're better. I think this team's better. I think this team's more dangerous. And I loved our team last year. We had good players, and it was a fun season. It was a fun ride to finish the way we finished. I think there'll be a lot of similarities, especially with the four returners, that were in the rotation last year. Probably more similarities than differences. But coming off a game again where we really struggled offensively for a half. It's pretty simple for us in terms of where we are. I mean, we got to get back to playing the way we played, winning 5 of the last 6. Not the way we necessarily played here in the first 20. But I don't want to discount Ole Miss's credit in any way. They're playing really well, and they're playing with a lot of connection. And then defensively, it'll continue to be the same message. And I thought we took some defensive steps tonight. I thought we had a lot of really good possessions and played really, really hard. And if that carries over to the NCAA tournament with more of an offensive flow and rhythm, sharing the basketball at a higher level, better shot selection, we could be a dangerous team.
I mean, I certainly hope that's the case. And as he mentions, they had a stretch at the end of the regular season where they win 5 of 6 games because of that. And I'm not a bracketologist, I won't pretend to be. but they do have some chance of being a 7 seed, even after the rough performance against Ole Miss. They still have some chance of being a 7 seed. And if they are a 7 seed as opposed to an 8 seed, as we've said before, their chances of winning a tournament game, I would say, go up dramatically. And their chances of winning 2 tournament games is at least a possibility, whereas as an 8-9 playing round 2 against a 1 seed, you probably wouldn't expect that to happen. So there's a chance they make some noise in March Madness, and I hope they do. It'd be an unbelievable experience for us to watch Georgia win an NCAA tournament game. How fun would that be? But to once again go back to what for me are fairly meager expectations for Georgia, I do have to give caution here. You can't be down 20 in the first half. You just can't. If you want to enjoy the pat on the back you deserve for back-to-back trips to the NCAA tournament, you can't have happen next week what happened yesterday and what happened against Gonzaga a year ago. You can't get run out of the gym in the first 20 minutes. And I hope that's not even an issue. I hope that we don't have to talk about that at all. But this has been persistently reoccurring for Georgia in an otherwise good season. These early moments right after tip-off, right there in the first half, where Georgia builds a deficit that's difficult to come back from. I think you want to be careful about that. So back-to-back trips to March Madness, giving us a lot of entertainment. I'm ready to call it a success. Just don't next week do what you did yesterday. Don't get down big early, because that's going to put a sour taste in the mouths of a lot of folks who would actually like to give you a lot of credit. And we'll make that around the doghouse here today. Okay, before we're done, I'm going to give you one more reminder about a really fun event that we got going on Saturday with one of our great sponsors. We'll do that before we're done here today, and we'll give you an update on the SEC. A lot of big talk coming from the league right now about some frustrations with the rest of these knuckleheads across college athletics. We'll tell you what's new on that. But for now, speaking of what's new, everything as it relates to UGA recruiting, let's talk to Jeff Sentell here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Great to have Jeff Sentell, as per usual, on a Friday. Jeff, the theme of the show off the top was big questions for spring. Now, we'll get into some of the recent maneuverings of the 2027 class here in a moment. But let me just pose this to you, whether it be guys you have covered coming in for their first spring, guys getting ready for that second spring. When you think about, some of the names that you've written stories for us at DawgNation.com about, who do you have your eye on as it relates to a Georgia spring practice, which will begin next week?
Brandon, good morning. Let me give DawgNation some good news this morning. I heard recently about a member of the 2026 class. I feel like he's probably had as much hype around him as maybe only one or two other players in the class, but this is some new news, and to me, I think it's substantial. I've been told by people that would definitely know this, that Caden Prothro has kind of already changed his body in about 2 or 3 months in Athens. I think he reported to Georgia somewhere around 212. And I hear he's almost 235 right now. That's 20 pounds of good weight. And Brandon, as we've always said and tried to say very cautiously on that program, the first thing is there's an overlapping skill set with Elias Williams about him bursting through the door as a true freshman. But the main thing is his body was always going to dictate what he played for Georgia. Now, if he stayed underneath 230, he was likely going to be a wide receiver. Lawrence Cager mold, Colby Young mode. If he got closer to 240, 245, then he was going to be a hand on the ground, tight end type guy. And already, Brandon, 2 months in, that's what we're seeing with Prothro. If I had to throw you a name out as a guy that I think will sparkle, I guess I got one position, I got one name. Valdenstone. I think Georgia, if they can get 80% of what Christian Miller was for Georgia with Valdenstone in terms of a penetrating, knifing defensive lineman. He's got great twitch, Brandon, and great twitch at 6'3.5", 6'4", 315 pounds. That's pretty uncommon. And I just got the feeling, Brandon, after Georgia didn't have many safeties last year, that they're going to come away this spring feeling good about maybe 1, 2, or 3 safeties. That's the Tyree Greens. That's the obviously the Jordan Smiths out of Houston County, and we cannot forget Zach Fort as well. I think they've really done well at the safety position because they didn't really have a lot of confidence in their young players there.
This may be a dumb thing to say, but it's my opinion nonetheless, that if it's a guy like Prothro who could be a tight end or could be a wide receiver, if he's one of those tweener guys, if you're a tweener, I want you to play tight end if you can. I want you to be big enough to play tight end. And my reason for saying that is, people that play fantasy football will know this. There was a theory that, okay, at a certain point in the draft, it's better to take the best tight end than, whatever wide receiver be slotted in that same spot, because you can still get a good wide receiver when the draft snakes back around to you. But once you miss the best tight end, the second best tight end is going to be down the pecking order just a bit. I'm probably oversimplifying that, but that's a draft theory that was out there. I think there's something to be said, too, when it comes to a college team of an athlete like Prothro at wide receiver is good to have an athlete like that. An athlete like that at tight end is special because of how he would compare to the typical tight end. And Georgia's really good at this. A lot of tight ends that could play receiver. I want the elite athlete that could be a receiver, but boy, I sure do like using that elite athlete that could be a receiver at tight end because it just elevates the overall athleticism of my offense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Brandon, I think you're cooking with some gas there. Here's why I've always thought it, and I try to simplify this because you see so many players, is what's closer to the prototype? Caden Prothro at 6'6", 250, that's a dream prototype first-round tight end. Now, if you tried everything else with him, like 6'6", 220, 225, 228, that's really not the ideal wide receiver, except maybe for like the jump ball situation, or if you're talking about Megatron, Calvin Johnson, a guy that, was legitimately a 4'4" guy at 250 pounds.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably a fair thing to bring up. You've obviously had a lot of stuff at DawgNation.com this week as it relates to recruiting. We'll get to some of that in a moment. Future names we could be hearing about. But Georgia also, going back to last week, really just exactly a week ago, adds a commitment, Jerry Outhouse Jr. This going down on, you don't see a lot of Friday night commitments, but Outhouse did commit on Friday night in a little bit of an odd ceremony captured by 24/7 Sports. But nonetheless, Outhouse, a member of this 27 class now. We talked about him some last week. What is Georgia getting in him at the moment?
First of all, Brandon, he's a very entertaining guy. I don't know if you caught the production, but he actually dialed it down. He was telling me he was thinking about doing some wardrobe changes, and he was going to have some Texas Tech shorts, and he was going to really try to fool the audience. He kind of tried to keep it in bounds or in between the hashes a little bit. He's very charismatic, Brendan. He's got 4.43 speed in the 40. I think I was joking with our Kaylee Mansell on Before the Hedges. He's the first Georgia commitment we've talked about who has hair longer than hers, which is always intriguing. That's his ponytail. He's always had it. He's going to take some visits, but he is a guy, Brandon. We have confidence, a little bit more confidence in this shaky world when we know that this young man has been silently committed for some time. And then he waited, basically in his case, at least almost 2 months, a month and a half to commit to Georgia. Dante Williams, Brandon, if you want to champion somebody right now, is kind of the early attaboy, give a helmet sticker to somebody on the recruiting trail among the assistant coaches. Dante's really doing a great job.
It's good to hear. And look, I said this, I think last week may have been the moment in which I may have officially gotten old. In that, and I think Outhouse is a terrific player. I'm happy to have him come to Georgia. I think he's a really nice ad. But I've always, at least in a younger era, I like the hat show. I like the throwing the hat. I like the swerve. Sometimes it's fun to follow. We're doing a live video just because it creates some theatrics, and that's never a bad thing. I think I might be about, I don't know, and I don't blame Outhouse for this. I think it's just my personal taste have changed. I think I'm now about done with the hat toss and the swerve finish when it comes to this, especially when you don't exactly have the best signal strength. You're kind of doing this to a laptop camera. It's a little hard to follow. 24/7 sort of scooped his own announcement by putting the graphic up before he finished with his own presentation. I think I might be about done with what the staple of recruiting has been. Am I going to so-and-so school? No, I'm not, and I'm throwing that. Like when Quay Walker threw the Tennessee hat, man, that thing's still orbiting the earth, and I'm happy about it. I think I'm done with that now, though. I think it's just me. I think I've outgrown liking the, oh, I'm going to go to this school. Now I'm not. Now I'm doing this. Now I'm doing that. I think those kind of plot twist swerves, I think I might be out of that phase of my life now.
You know, Brennan, you and I always in a public setting, we like to kid each other about who's older chronologically and who's younger in spirit.
Sure.
I think I've got you definitely on the spirit thing here because, man, I just like variety. Like, what's the clarifying statement everybody says is these kids lift all these weights, they run all these 110s, let them have their moment. I don't mind the moments. I actually feel, I don't know, maybe because I'm a creature of habit, have probably been to 300 of these already, but like, when somebody does it efficiently with a little bit of cleverness to it, I'm a fan of that, especially when it shows their personality. Still, Brandon, one of the ones that sticks for me in recent memory, and we were there for it, was Juan Gaston. And that was a guy that probably said, I don't know, the lowest words per interview answer probably that I've seen in my career. And yet he goes out with a trick where he's wearing like 7 sweatshirts, like a bunch of Russian nesting dolls, and pulling them off and then going to the crowd. I mean, yeah, look at that. Our guy Cody on the spot with that, Brandon. It was one of those things mom and dad didn't know. They're like, oh, I guess we're going to South Carolina. And mama had a look like, no, I don't want that. So, I mean, I don't mind these kids. And again, Brandon, this was easily the least demonstrative, the least outgoing, engaging member of the 2026 class. And he's going to be a very, 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 very wealthy man in about a year and a half.
First of all, Juan Gas is one of my favorite guys on the team. I had forgotten about the, as you say, almost like a Russian nesting doll type of reveal. And like I said, this is probably my issue more so than the players themselves. I think I was more in favor of plot twist commitment announcements pre-NIL. I'm not even anti-NIL. I'm really not. But now that we know a lot of this is a boardroom negotiation, I guess I find myself a little less enthralled by the, ooh, did the hat get thrown? Something about that seems passe in a world in which all of a sudden now it's like, who's bringing the biggest stack of paper into the room, winning the recruitment. The notion of the hat toss just seems a little too antiquated in comparison to that. Probably my issue more so than theirs.
Brandon, we're going to work on it. What we're going to do is we're going to be in consultation with one of these young men. And how about this? We'll dial up something where they have opposing teams' mascots come running down to the podium like it's WWE, WCW style, and he will body slam the ones he's not going to. Yeah. Even though I do think you're an old school guy now to the point where I think of another recent commitment ceremony where Mason Short basically got to the part where he was going to say, with that being said, I'm taking my talents too. And then he played Georgia on my mind. I think you'll always just be a sucker for something like that, though.
You're 100% right. If it's done well, I'm obviously going to like it because it always goes back to pro wrestling eventually. And if you really do the true, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that. If you pull it off well, then obviously we're here for it. Okay, I've got one thing somewhat off the beaten path I want to ask you about in a moment. Can you do me a favor, though, because it has been spring break for the coaches. It seems like it's a little quiet post-Jerry Outhouse on the recruiting front here right now. You've obviously written plenty of stories at DawgNation.com. But for those who may have checked out a bit on recruiting here, can you give me just a little bit of a snapshot of pre-spring practice, still a couple of months prior to official visits? Here is where things stand with the 2027 class. And then I've got a question I want to conclude with in a moment. But just give me a quick snapshot synopsis of where you think things are right now for Georgia in its 2027 class.
Brandon, let me use one of your attention-grabbing words. I'm going to say swerve here. And I have swerved to the point now, and this would be a take, especially in this transactional nature of recruiting right now. I'm pretty much on board 10 toes down, at least 9 toes down here, where I think right now, and I'm talking about spring practice, I think that's the biggest thing Georgia has to sell now on the recruiting trail. And what I mean by that is it's just comparison shopping. That's basically the way to say that as a modern consumer. Georgia encourages all their targets to go see all the schools they can, to bird dog, to eyeball, to immerse themselves in the middle of those practices, to soak it up like you're walking around Amen Corner at Augusta National. And then Kirby Smart and the Bulldogs want them to take the UGA challenge and like compare the intensity, the four-ring circus going with ultimate optimum reps, everybody yelling, the microphone, no wasted time. I had a recruit this week tell me that he's like, hey, dude, man, Georgia's basically an NFL team already.
Yeah.
That's what he wants. I think this is the best sell season for Georgia football because they can combine it with how crazy the stadium was when they beat Texas or when they beat Ole Miss, and how great the environment was against Alabama. And they know Georgia wins. They win SECs. They put players in the league. But I think this right now is very much a proving ground for Georgia where it sells itself better than anything else. And so when these recruits start coming in and they get smitten by Georgia, like, nobody really does it like that. I think that is definitely the time where these players decide, I'm going to take the official visit to Georgia. Georgia's my leader. And then all the steps start falling into place.
Okay, I told you, off the wall question, conclude this. There's been a little bit of battle back and forth between you and I both have friends at both companies, On3 and 24/7 Sports, as it relates to player rankings and things like that. I say most of that's in good fun. Obviously both sides want to be the best, considered the best when it comes to player rankings, and I don't think really anybody's getting their feelings hurt over any of that. It's just, nature of competition. But I did see, I meant to ask you about this last week, I did see where I think the 24/7 Sports company that covers recruiting, obviously people have heard us talk about them before. We don't do a lot of this talk, but apparently they're doing away with their composite team ranking for how they rate, classes, which is, to me, the historic gold standard. And like I said, I like, people that work at both companies, but man, when we think about, hey, the best class here, the best class there, even though On3's come on in recent years, the standard for measuring that going back for a long time has been the 24/7 Sports composite team ranking. Jeff, are they really doing away with this? Because if they are, I think that's a huge mistake.
Yeah, Brandon, you're right. They're great people, great analysts, great minds at both companies, dear friends at both companies. I feel like it's just like constantly evolving. I'll give some folks a little inside baseball here. Here at DawgNation, what we always tried to do is, even though On3 was coming on, we felt that the 24/7 Sports composite was necessary because there's the historical matter there where, the On3 are now the rivals industry ranking. They weren't ranking players in 2018, 2019, and 2020, where the 24/7 Sports composite was. And I still think the best thing they can do is to take the aggregate somewhat formula, whatever they use for all these players. One service might be higher on a guy than another. Sometimes biases can kind of creep in there a little bit. But I think what you do there is you make sure you have at least as kind of a uniform, you have a spectrum where you're going to bring in the most viewpoints and the most objective viewpoints for ranking these players. And that's still going to say the same for 24/7 Sports. They're going to still rank the players via the composite, but the composite won't be a part of their overall team ranking. And, it gets really the waters get kind of diluted and muddy here, Brandon, because like one service now still rates on quantity. In terms of how many players you got. So if you got 31 commits, you're going to have a high score. Whereas if you have 24, you may not ever be in the top 3 or top 4 simply because of numbers. Rivals, what they do right now is they take quantity versus quality. They look at quality. They look at the greater measure of those high ranking commitments. I think the industry itself is in flux, Brandon, where if you had to ask me to simplify my thoughts, I would basically say that they're trying to do something to be stand out or to be something where they're a little bit different than anybody else.
So the reason why I ask that, or reason why I care, I mean, people can do professionally what they think is, right for their business. But as a consumer of a lot of recruiting content, especially in this interesting age in which we live in where things feel a little bit different, the more we can do to connect current recruiting stories to history, I think the better, right? We got to be able to say how this class compares to so-and-so class. And now there's a pretty substantial history of recruiting coverage. There was a time when you and I were both much younger where this was still making it up as you go along type stuff. Well, that's not what we have. We've got at least 20 years of pretty good recruiting data, and I don't want to lose that as a comparison. I want to know how this year's Georgia class compares to 5 years ago, 10 years. Like I want there to be some of that because I just think it makes the recruiting conversation a little easier to have.
Brendan, it's going to make us both feel old, probably everybody else watching old as well. One of my summer projects I've got tabbed for Dog Nation is I'm going to take a look at what I think is the building block of the Kirby Smart era, and that was the 2017 recruiting class. In terms of, I think, when the 30 for 30 happens eventually about Kirby Smart's Georgia, I think 93 K-Day, I think the 2017 class will be basically the flag bearers for a lot of the good stuff that was later to happen down the road. Brandon, I'm sure you're math guy, your mind's turning right now. Can you believe it's been 10 years since Jake Fromm and Richard LeCount
Hard to believe.
Andrew Thomas were high
Hard
school
to believe.
It is crazy, but think about that, Brandon. You and I have watched this entire era. It has been our daily work to cover this entire era. I mean, those 2017 recruits were the first one where Kirby Smart said, Papa's got a brand new bag, and we got something different at Georgia that people have been wanting for a lot of years. And I think 2017 begat 2018, and that was the class that when those players stuck around, it gave Georgia the first national title since 1980. And I just feel like it's crazy to think about because like DeAndre Swift's still in the league. Andrew Thomas is still in the league. We see our great friend Jake Fromm, who's transitioned after a cup of coffee or 3 or 4 or 5 in the league to the analyst side, the business side of everything else like that. But it's crazy to think that that's been 10 years since these guys were high school seniors.
Fascinating stuff, Jeff. We appreciate your time. We hope you have a great weekend. And, of course, as all of this work for the 2027 class comes together, we'll be talking about with you here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We will look forward to doing that with you soon.
Hey, man. Brandon, thanks, buddy. Got the Under Armour camp this weekend. Look for coverage on DawgNation.com.
Should be a lot of fun, Jeff. Thanks a lot for that preview. Can't wait to see it.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, great stuff from Jeff Sentell and all kinds of milestones, right? I mean, you're talking about 5 years this fall since the 2021 National Championship. 10 years since the I think the transformational class for Georgia was that 2017 class. Just completely laid the foundation for everything else that Georgia would do. We're 10 years removed from that. I'm telling you, man, time keeps on marching. I believe there's a song about that. Indeed, that is the case. Let me tell you this before we do our SEC Through. Saturday, which is tomorrow, really fun stuff going on. Aiken Ford Arena, downtown Athens. Athens Rock Lobsters hockey. First Responders Night brought to you by ServPro. Obviously, we're huge fans of ServPro. One of my favorite things about them is the support they show for our community, including celebrating our community heroes. We're reminded all the time of just how important those folks are. Our policemen, firemen, the people that are keeping us safe, the people that really protect our civilization. And obviously ServPro wants to honor them. And tomorrow night with the Athens Rock Lobsters, that's what's going to happen. All throughout the game, courtesy of ServPro, heroes will be celebrated. And then before the game, starting at 4 p.m. outside Aikens Ford Arena, I'm going to be there, DawgNation giving out DawgNation swag, and ServPro's going to be there too. You should bring the whole family. Experience all of the police vehicles and the ServPro Mobile Command Center, a lot of cool trucks. Great experience, and you can get your tickets by listening to me carefully, but also clicking the link. All of our platforms, you'll be able to find the link. It's bit.ly. It's a bit.ly link, bit.ly/rock lobster ticks, tick spelled T-I-X. One more time, bit.ly/rock lobster ticks, tick spelled T-I-X. We'll see you tomorrow night, Athens Rock Lobsters and ServPro, as we celebrate our first responders. DawgNation lucky enough to be on hand for all of that. All right, so let me begin with this. We have talked a little bit recently about the possibility and the saber rattling, if you want to call it that the SEC may break off and go do its own thing. Now, I anticipate what many of you think about this, and I don't think you're necessarily wrong. This feels a lot like the typical offseason chatter of, well, maybe this and maybe that. And it's like years ago, it used to be, maybe Auburn should be in the SEC East. It feels like we did that every summer for 10 years in a row. Now that's not a thing because there's no SEC East. But there are certain topics that just feel made for the offseason, and it's mostly just theoretical thinking and nothing tangible ever happens. I do get that. And for those of you who say this is just another one of those things, you might not be wrong. You might not be wrong. Totally acknowledge that. But as I was asked on the radio this week, I was doing a spot with our friends at 92.9 The Game here in Atlanta, and Andy Bunker, one of the hosts, said about this particular stuff at the SEC, is this a real threat or something they're just doing for leverage? Well, it's not necessarily a bad idea just to do this for leverage, but you don't get any actual leverage from the threat unless you're willing to follow through with it. And what we know is Ross Dellinger's got more reporting about this in his weekly piece for On3 this week, that a lot of the key decision makers within the SEC did gather together this week around the SEC basketball tournament being in Nashville. This is a preview meeting for the spring meeting. They'll take place in May there in Destin, Florida. And the talk continues to percolate about maybe the SEC would break off and go do its own thing. In Ross's reporting, he brings up two potential problems with this. Problem number one, as he points out, the model where the SEC would break off, he says, might not be necessary if Congress passes all-encompassing college sports legislation, a move that Dellinger reports feels more possible than ever, even though that's not a guarantee. He also says, if the SEC does bring its enforcement in-house, basically making its own rules, enforcing its own rules, but the other leagues don't abide by similar rules, then the issue of competitive disadvantage arises. So that's two issues that Ross Dellinger brings up. As far as the first part of that goes, well, maybe we might get federal legislation. As I've pointed out, though, if there is a move towards federal legislation, which I've called for, and I do believe, as Dellinger says, is far more possible than some folks have ever treated it as it might be, it does seem like there's a growing number of people within Washington that would like to help out with this. But the problem from the SEC standpoint is the potential help that could be provided for making some better rules and having rules that can stand up to court. And the problem with moving that direction is it's not being led by the SEC right now. That this is the card that the SEC has to play, because the move towards any kind of all-encompassing federal legislation, the move towards that is being led by a guy like Cody Campbell at Texas Tech. There are billionaires that are trying to buy college athletics, and the SEC doesn't really have those billionaires for the most part. And so while all-encompassing federal legislation, unlike some of you, I think could actually be a pretty good thing for college athletics' future, the negotiations right now are between Washington and a guy like Campbell, whose interests are different than those from the SEC, as the SEC has openly stated. So this is the card the SEC has to play right now, whether they're serious about doing it or not. And then when Ross Dellinger brings up well, if you make rules and enforce your rules against your schools and the other schools don't enforce their own rules, you're at a competitive disadvantage. But if we're honest for a moment, the SEC is already at a competitive disadvantage. The SEC is facing some headwinds that have threatened its supremacy as the most important, the most popular, the not quite the biggest, but we would say the best conference for college athletics. You know, the proliferation of billionaires who just want to buy this thing, and the schools that want to reinvent the idea of what college athletics even is, the reckless, radical willingness to do some of that has probably already put the SEC, at least as things are currently constituted, at a disadvantage. So once again, the SEC may be playing the only card it truly has, which is to say, our product is still the most popular. We may not be the best conference. It may have been a couple of years, now 3 since we won a national championship, but nobody tunes into college football games more so than they tune in to watch ours. We have negotiating leverage in a TV rights agreement that we probably didn't take full advantage of. The SEC probably agreed to a substandard deal, but we still have more negotiating leverage for our product than you have for yours. And so therefore, that is the card that we can play, especially in light of the just frankly, radical change that seems to be proposed other places. The SEC finding a way to circle the wagons and protect its own, I think this is a good idea. They may not really mean it, but if they stand by and do nothing, they are not going to like the outcome. I'm just telling you right now. If the SEC does nothing, if the SEC continues to let its its product, its entity, its league drift in the direction of whichever way the wind's blowing, they will not like where they end up. And that is just as clear as day. So we'll see what happens next with that. One more thing here as it relates to Sunday. Georgia will find out who it's playing. NCAA tournament field set to be released. And, you know, we live in the age of, they used to say on First Take, embrace debate. This is the sort of embrace debate era in some respects. People are always arguing on social media about whatever. There are a couple of things for the NCAA tournament that are just made for online debate, almost as if they were created by AI. Have you followed the story of Miami of Ohio at all? You probably haven't, but Miami of Ohio made it all the way through the regular season undefeated, completely undefeated, and then they turned around and lost in the first round of the MAC tournament. Got beat by UMass in the first round of the MAC tournament. So here you have a team, undefeated regular season, only one loss, but not their conference's automatic qualifier to the NCAA tournament. There's a pretty interesting debate of should they make it or not. And look, this is one of those things where, like, I mean, there are so many issues in which, like, the sum total of the media is all in one direction, and you'd be hard-pressed to find anybody in the media that doesn't think that Miami of Ohio should be in the NCAA tournament. This is one of those things that the media has a tendency to just sort of move like a monolith on, and this is certainly one of those things, rightly or wrongly, where every opinion essentially is Xerox of previous opinions. So argument's going to be you can't leave Cinderella out of the tournament. You know, you can't leave him out for one loss. I don't have a strong opinion on it necessarily, but the counter argument to that is they played an intentionally, seemingly soft schedule of really no non-conference win of note. Obviously, you're not going to rack up big wins in the MAC, and this is a very thin resume for a team that's trying to get the at-large bid into the tournament. So it's a really interesting debate. I don't know there is a right answer, but it's a pretty stiff debate taking place right now. There's also, conversely, the debate about Auburn on the other side. And I assume Auburn's not getting in the tournament. Their record's obviously terrible. But they did play tough games out of conference. They didn't win them, but they did play them. So you've got this team that played a tough schedule but has a bad record, hoping to get in. The flip side of that's Miami of Ohio, who has a sterling record but played nobody. And it's simply a matter of who belongs in more, which is pretty fascinating. And as I think I told you this last week, if you just like the misery of your rivals, y'all should go and pay attention, like one of these Auburn message boards, or if your social media feed ever shows you some of the Auburn angst right now, their fans are so mad about the state of what Auburn basketball's become. They relegated themselves to being a basketball school, and now they can't even win in basketball. What a disaster all of that is. So pretty funny stuff. Selection Sunday on Sunday. Georgia's going to be on the field. I think they have some chance of being a 7, but it may be on that 8-9 line. We shall see about that. And, oh, yeah, by the way, before we wrap it up, against my better judgment, because I haven't exactly earned this, the demand seems to be overwhelming. And as somebody who plays the hits, people seem to want to bring back the Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge for what I believe is year 3. People seem to want to do that. I'm very surprised. I did not think we would get a resounding call to bring this back, but we have. There is a chance this is returning, and it could be better than ever for reasons I'll tell you about next week. But for now, we'll make that your SEC through. By the way, before we give our golden shoe, let me also give a shout-out to the Diamond Dogs. SEC play for them begins this weekend. Tennessee coming to call, new-look Tennessee team, with Tony Vitello no longer being there. By the way, Kenny Ishikawa is back. He'll pitch this weekend, I think, for Georgia. And obviously, he's a two-way player, so his bat be a potent part of the lineup's return. So good news to have Kenny Ishikawa back. One of the names I think the Georgia fans are going to grow to like and know as the Dogs go through SEC play. So best of luck to the Diamond Dogs on that. Golden Shoe, full disclosure, I think I meant to give this as our Golden Shoe yesterday, but I got it mixed up with the previous post. Either way, we'll give our friends from Mercier Orchards some more love here. Our guy Randall Thagard recently enjoying a trip up there to the beautiful mountains in North Georgia there at Blue Ridge, and on site with Mercier Orchards, enjoying some of those fried pies and the hard cider and everything else they serve to you right there in their great facility when you go check out Mercier Orchard. So you can do that, where you can pick up the great taste of Mercier Orchard's hard cider wherever you are. It's your favorite supermarket, beverage store, whatever else we would say with our friends at Kroger. So we'll give Randall a golden shoe for sharing a nice photo with us. That's great to see. Lousy, stinking Gators. The truth is they are really good in basketball once again. So they may be heading for a really fun March here. But as that happens for them, we'll remind them that they better get the basketball wins where they can, because football, not so great. How about 1,952 days? That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. That's your Gator Hater Updater. We hope you have a great weekend. We'll see you back here Monday. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We'll look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs, they show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that today. By the way, Eugene Marine, very funny. I think this is a shot towards Dennis. It's interesting to see some of our longtime DawgNation, webpage folks now getting and mixed up with some of these ne'er-do-wells who show up on YouTube. He says the last time y'all won a national title, Vince Wilfork weighed 250 pounds, which is funny. Let's see what else. Bill Camacho says Ishikawa's not pitching today, though, is he? He's not pitching. I think he's playing. He's not pitching, I don't think. I think I saw from our friend Olivia that he's pitching Sunday, maybe. But I've had 1,000 things going on. I'm not fully briefed, I don't think. So Wyatt Fielden, who does know, Wyatt follows this stuff very closely, says he will not pitch today or hit. He will just pitch Sunday. He doesn't want to rush everything at once. So he's not hitting either. Interesting. One Adam J mentioning the Jeff Sentell curl. He does sort of have that, which I love. It looks great. I have a little bit of then you call it like a cow lick, like right here. That's my weird hair thing. Jeff has the nice little curl that pops up. Jeff's got a great head of hair. Don't think I don't stare at that sometimes because, like Jeff is older than me, looks younger, unfortunately. And one of the things you notice is like Jeff just got, like, he didn't have an ounce. There's not one part of his skull where there's any hair missing at all. And like, I look okay right here, but if I were to lean down, it's a little bit like a Hollywood, facade where it's like the city street facade where there's actually no building behind it. That's kind of what I have going on here, where it's like if I look down enough, you're going to find out. It's a little bit like Lake Placid in the back here. But Jeff's got that big, full head of hair. Don't think I had noticed that. Alan Hampton says teams that you mentioned, Tennessee, Florida, et cetera, have traded their quality in football to become quality basketball. Yeah. What Caitlin Clark did for the popularity of women's basketball, Kirby Smart did for men's basketball. Kirby Smart is the #1 ambassador of men's basketball anywhere. No one has made more basketball fans than Kirby Smart has. Florida fans, by the thousands, have gravitated to the hardwood. Auburn fans reinvented their entire athletic department. Tennessee fans, complete and total wannabes, but still, that is now what they want to be. They have all, just the mass exodus of all of those orange-clad fans away from football towards basketball. Kirby Smart is the #1 ambassador for men's college basketball. No one has generated more fan support, especially in the SEC, than what Kirby Smart has. Kirby's total domination of the SEC from football standpoint has made basketball fans out of tens upon tens of thousands. It's a tremendous accomplishment. Bill Camacho and the possibility that Carson Beck gets drafted by the Falcons. The Falcons don't have a ton of draft picks, so I don't really know what they'll be doing with them. And if you gave me 10 guesses what they're going to do at the quarterback position, I'm talking about the next couple of years. I'm just not quite so sure I'd even know. You give me 10 guesses, I'm not quite so sure I'm going to know. I'm guessing the new regime, even if it's just in name only, even if it is just a facade, I'm guessing they now have the permission structure they need to admit the Michael Penix experiment was a total mistake and the Kirk Cousins was a disaster, And after all the resources invested in both these quarterbacks, by next season, maybe they're just going after another attempt at a franchise quarterback. Maybe that's the case, if I had to guess. By the way, how about our guy Randall Thaggart, who just won the Golden Shoe, now showing up in YouTube? You'd love to see that. He says the Falcons love drafting quarterback flops. Yeah, boy, they seem to. Let's see what else. I think, is it Marshall Fleming that was talking about being sick of Ole Miss, or somebody said that in here. Yeah, Ole Miss has been pretty rough on Georgia as of late, unfortunately. Indeed, that's the case. Yeah, Joseph Kennedy said he was getting sick of Ole Miss. I'm right there with you on that. They've become pretty rough. Jim Blair checking in from Colquitt County. You love that. You love to see that. Garrison Tucker says, does Elijah Griffin have 3 sacks this year? I'll take more. I'm actually really high on Griffin. He's one of my guys. That is one of my guys that and that's not certainly breaking sports to say, hey, watch out for Elijah Griffin. I'm not pretending that it is, but seriously, I am in on Elijah Griffin. So what Adam J says, because I do wear this every now and then, honestly, like, this is so comfortable that I have to fight the temptation just to wear it every day. Just to wear it. Like, this is so comfortable. It's soft. It feels so good. It doesn't look the best on camera. It makes me look like a ghost, but it's so comfortable that I fight the temptation to wear this every day. And it's, as Adam says, a complete provocation against the audience, a total taunt, because you can't buy this thing in stores. It doesn't. I mean, the company went out of business. He says he had one made just because he couldn't find one anywhere else, which is really funny. I'm glad that you were able to find one. But yeah, I honestly, especially when it's a little cold in the morning when I leave, just throw this thing on. One of the things that has helped a little bit is, if you notice, hoodie culture is a big part of golf now. So there's like the dress-up hoodie that you sometimes see. Kirby Smart wore one of these. I want to say it was to the SEC championship game, the final press conference. There's a sharp dressed-up hoodie. So that has actually elevated the hoodie. If you've noticed, the hoodie is, the hoodie is enjoying a little bit of a higher altitude than it once would have enjoyed. And so a little easier to get away with wearing it in the workspace because, like I said, all the expensive apparel makers now make very expensive hoodies. And so if you see one at first glance, you're like, well, this must be one of those expensive hoodies because he's wearing it to work. In this case, it's just a regular sweatshirt, but, the hoodie is enjoying a little bit of a moment. So, yeah, it's all I can do not to want to wear this thing each and every day. And for those of you who would like to buy one, I'm sorry that you can't. And by the way, if you would like to send me some clothes so people can can actually follow through and make a purchase, we're also open for business on that too. G. Gray says, I wear dress-up hoodies. Yeah, I like that look. I do. I like that look. Where you have that little golf collar poking out the bottom, a well-fitting hoodie. It looks sharp. It does look sharp. What I'm not in favor of, because I'm just, I don't know. There you go. Like, this hoodie has changed the game. Not even that brand necessarily. Kirby's wearing Kirby likes to wear gear that the average person can't get. That's a Hedges hoodie. I believe that's in reference to the Hedges Club, which is on down the street from the McGill Society. It's like, the McGill Society is essentially your 3-star restaurant. The Hedges Club is on a completely different zip code from that. But that style right there has changed the game. That's changed the game. The thing where you have the well-fitting hoodie that hangs down the right way. Because the truth is, the fleecy hoodies do stick up a good bit. With the golf shirt poking out, that is a look that it's hard not to look good in. With all due respect to Kirby, like, look how, there are some apparel choices that Kirby makes that aren't quite as flattering as that one is, but it's hard not to look good in that look. That's the more dressed up, professional, refined version of this is essentially just sort of a Friday slob thing. But that's a sharp look right there. That's changed the game. When you have that little bit of golf collar peeking out the top, I love that. I love that. G. Grace also mentioned the quarter zips. Yeah, I mean, I've always said people call them pullovers, but to me they're really put together because when you put one on, it just puts everything together. You know, y'all may be surprised to hear this. I don't exactly have an Olympic physique, but in a pullover you really can't tell. You're just put together. Sometimes you see like the little you untucked shirt, you're wrinkled. You throw the pullover on, it's like maybe you left it untucked on purpose. I don't know. It just put together. I'm a big fan of anything like that. I would say that of all the various pastimes, golf has done a huge favor, even for people who don't like to play golf. Golf has introduced a very functional style that just looks good on most people. It really does. There are a lot of things that don't look good on anybody. But there's a certain kind of golf style that I think looks good on most people. That's one of the reasons why I'm in favor of maintaining some standards around a golf course, because golf style is, I think, good for most people. So in other words, I like the hoodie on the course as long as I can see the golf shirt. But, I don't like to see the absence of the collar on the golf shirt, on the golf course, I mean to say. BF says, try finding a teenager not wearing a hoodie, even at 100 degrees. Yeah, like my son was going to the driving range yesterday to tell on him for a moment, and he didn't have much time, but he's going to go try to squeeze in a few hits. I swear it took him 30 minutes to get dressed. What are you doing? He's going to hit for 20 minutes, but he's taking 25 minutes to figure out what to wear. Garrison Tucker says, does Jordan Hall get more sacks than Griffin? If I'm forced to predict, I would say no. I think that Hall comes back and has a very good year for Georgia. I like Griffin for a decentish number. Somebody said 3 earlier. If we're saying 3 is the over-under, I'd love to see him get 3.5, 4, something like that. I wouldn't mind that at all. Wildman Slayer says, if you tried putting the hood inside the shirt, he says, yeah, you can kind of do that. I mean, but actually, I don't hate the hoodie sticking out. It's just not quite as neat looking. If you've got like the $150 golf pullover, the hood just lays down so nice, This one obviously going to stick up a little bit more, which I don't necessarily hate. And I don't know why is a hooded sweatshirt more comfortable than a non-hooded sweatshirt? Like, I don't really understand that. But it is kind of, right? I mean, it's like, for whatever reason, this is just more comfortable. I don't even put the hood on that much, but it's just more comfortable. Although I'll tell you this, and we'll get back to Georgia football after this. At home, I've got a sweatshirt that I wear almost every day that my grandparents, who I loved and have, unfortunately been gone now for a good long while, that they gave me as a gift. And obviously I'm holding on to it partially for sentimental reasons, but it's not even that. It's just the most comfortable sweatshirt I own. And it's just crazy to think that, they've unfortunately now been gone for a pretty good while. But this sweatshirt they gave me, back when they were both still in very good health, still cranking. Amazing to see. By the way, Henry Dion mentions Chase Linton. There are a lot of people that like Linton a lot. There are a lot of people who closer to it than me, know more about it than I do. They like Linton a lot. There are some people who will tell you Linton and Ekenabon both they may be on their way. Philip Jordan Wells says the hoodies are warmer in windy weather. Could be the case. And I'll tell you this, I'm a very hot-natured person, but as I get a little bit older, I guess, I don't have 1 ounce of tolerance for wind. I really don't. And for whatever reason, in our palatial DawgNation World Headquarters studios, the walk from the parking lot to the building is the windiest place on the planet. The windiest, coldest place on the planet. I don't even know why. I have 0 tolerance for wind. Marshall Fleming says, particular brand of golf pullovers, he says they look great. I have maybe 10 of them. Yeah, I mean, there are some pretty good pullovers in that golf space. They're not all $150. Some of them are a little less than that, and they just make you look good. I'm telling you, man. They should call them, instead of pullovers, they should call them put-togethers, because they just make you look more put together. No matter what, you can have a T-shirt on underneath, you can have the golf shirt, you can be untucked, you can be wrinkled. You throw that pullover on, you're just put together. Mudcat Jones says, what about Isaiah Gibson? Mudcat, this is where I have to plead somewhat ignorance, because I don't know what this means, and it may mean nothing. But I hear grapevine, rumor mill, whatever you want to call it. I hear more about a Kennebon and Linton than I probably do about Isaiah Gibson. Now, that may just be, bad information, right? It could just be incomplete information. But if I'm being honest about what the rumor mill sounds like, in the little channels I swim in, a little more Kennebon, a little more Linton, probably not as much Gibson, but that could change in a moment's notice. And I'll give you an example of that. If you want to go back, Jeff Sentell was talking a moment ago about 2017 class, that class 10 years ago. That was at the time, best class Georgia ever signed, and it started a run of elite classes year after year after year. You could have done the same rumor mill stuff back then. You know who did not get universal praise in the rumor mill? Who did not get, lots of pats on the back? You'll laugh. Some of you may know this. A guy that was not universally praised in the rumor mill, nobody on the record, this is all just like hush-hush, whatever. People weren't too sure about Andrew Thomas. Isn't that hilarious? That in retrospect, that obviously seems stupid. People weren't too sure about Andrew Thomas. They didn't know. I don't know. Maybe. Andrew Thomas started from day one and became the number 4 draft pick. But in 2017, or before that, a little bit before that, yeah, maybe, I don't know. I don't even remember what even the questions would have been. But there was some suspicion of, I'm not quite so sure he's got it. And then obviously he became one of the great freshmen that Georgia's had in this era, and essentially a centimillionaire now because of the contracts he signed in the NFL. So the rumor mill is not always right. Let's see what else. Matthew Dill says that Jordan Davis used to wear a hoodie under his jersey during his days at Georgia. That always cracked me up. I didn't realize that, or at least I had forgotten that. That's a tough thing to pull off because, man, these football jerseys now, especially for the bigger guys, man, they are tight. Oh, my gosh, they're tight. Man, they are tight. All right, we're going to get ready to go. Let's see what else. Miriam Corbin's got an idea for a song. She says it's called I Don't Care by Kane Walker. Check it out. I'm going to ask Josh Brooks to have it played every home game. I'll have to check that out, Miriam. I'm not familiar with that song, but I'll have to check that out. Thank you for sharing it. Joey Waddell says, I'm just proud that our teams are playing meaningful games in their respect season. I do kind of agree with that. And listen, I'm all about those who are like, I want to see them go all the way, win the championship. Obviously, I'd love to do that. But as you said, I'm just thankful that I'm going to watch a selection show on Sunday, and Georgia's going to be a part of it. I have deep nostalgia of the NCAA tournament. I have loved that event since I was a true child. I have loved that event because I am of the age where when I was like a kid just first getting into sports, the NCAA tournament was becoming I think March, like what March Madness is, it became that as I was first getting into it. So the way in which March Madness just essentially took over the world, it's one of the most, people don't realize, it may be the second most popular sporting event in America. It's not as a sport more popular than college football is, but March Madness as a collective event is a very big deal. And so I grew up with that. And so I still love the event, have deep nostalgia for the event, and I'm thrilled that on Sunday when they do the bracket, Georgia's going to be in it. And as we watch Georgia go through this SEC baseball season, when we start talking about baseball postseason, which is a electric factory. Baseball postseason is just absolute chaos in all the best ways. That Georgia's going to be a part of that too. You really don't get much better than that. I meant to mention this during the show. I'm really ashamed that I'm not just now doing this. Some days I just drop the ball. And this is an example of that. Somebody mentioned David Pollock in the chat. So David put out on X this week that his wife, Lindsay, now apparently cancer-free. My gosh, what an answer to prayer that is. Can you believe that? And I'm ashamed that I didn't mention this during the regular show. We certainly should have. But what a thrill that is. Just unbelievable news. And you want to talk about both of them, but especially Lindsay. The steadfast faith they have shown in the midst of all of this. I mean, whatever beyond inspiring is, I mean, it's really beyond inspiring. It's really, it's convicting. What's what it really is, convicting us all to live our life with a little bit better perspective. In some cases, maybe a much better perspective. But I believe we saw that from David this week, that she's cancer-free, and man, that is incredible news. Incredible news. All right, here we go. Let us see what else. Marshall Fleming asked about the spring game being shown on TV. They have not said word one about anything. Now, the Braves just announced their TV package for the whole season yesterday, or whatever day it was this week. So Georgia's not in any real huge hurry. But I do believe that GA is going to happen. At one point in time, I wasn't so sure it was. Now I think it probably is going to happen. There'll be a fan on sale day, but even in recent years, they were pretty slow or late putting the tickets on sale. That will come, and honestly, I'm not even sure ESPN even wants for this is the dumbest thing in the world to me. I'm not even sure how much ESPN even wants to televise these things for whatever reason. This doesn't make any sense because obviously people will watch these games. But ESPN does not seem to have a huge appetite for them. They don't do nearly as enough with them like they probably could. So I think there's a pretty good chance that there may not be even any streaming video for that this year because there wasn't last year. I hope I'm wrong because it obviously hurts people not to be able to see the game. Yeah, Cedric Graham asking the same thing. We will find out, but I think there's a very good chance the game takes place with no television. I think they have a very good chance. Foster Moss asks, how come the NCAA is over basketball but not over football? It's simply about who determines the national champion. College football's national champion is awarded by the college football playoff. The NCAA has no say over that whatsoever. The NCAA still governs its member institutions in terms of how they operate. Like back in the day, theoretically, they were supposed to stop cheating. So they govern the member institutions, but they do not award the national championship. And you'll notice this, especially old days. All the national champions, except for football, basically look like the same trophy because they were NCAA trophies. You don't get an NCAA trophy for winning the football national championship because it's not an NCAA national championship. NCAA awards the FCS national champion, but the NCAA does not award the football national championship, which also has this reverberation. When people say during the playoff time of year, why do we put James Madison in the playoff? Why do we put Tulane in the playoff? Why do we put these group of 5 teams that have no chance of winning and nobody wants to see? Why do we do this? It'd be better if we didn't have them. There's really nobody that disagrees with that, including the decision makers themselves. They all agree it'd be better not to have the group of 5 teams in the college football playoff. The audience would like it more. The competition would be better. They are undeserving of the spot they are given. And yet no one is in a big hurry to take it from them for the point that Foster brings up, which is while the college football playoff could do whatever it wants, that would have reverberations for the NCAA. And in the NCAA, which owns a behemoth, the NCAA owns the men's basketball tournament. That is a gigantic sporting event, and they make billions from it. The only thing that's holding the NCAA together, everybody was like, everybody always talks about how much they hate the NCAA, but the reason why the NCAA is not going away is because the NCAA currently owns a multi-billion-dollar property, and that is the NCAA men's basketball tournament. It's a gigantic, gigantic thing. And so nobody ever really explains this, but part of the reason that the group of 5 teams get treated kindly for the college football playoff is because the other Power 4 schools know they need a certain level of cooperation to hold the NCAA tournament together. Now, there may come a point in which the power schools kick them out of the basketball too, but they're a little slower to want to do that because everybody's making so much money on it right now. But that's the basic gist of it, is that the NCAA's reason for existing is the men's basketball tournament. That's essentially all it does, is it holds together a multi-billion-dollar television property. All right. A lot of talk about some good linebackers here at Florida, including Derek Brooks from Florida State here on the YouTube side of things. All right. Let's see what else. Nothing else. All right, let's go for now. Y'all have a great weekend. Enjoy it. Best luck to the Diamond Dogs. We'll see what happens with the Hoops Dogs on Sunday. We'll talk more about the Golden Shoe Bracket Challenge on Monday. Spring practice will be getting close. We'll be in spring practice week, and it's just one of those nice things to turn the corner on that. Just I don't know, it just feels good to have it back. And whether G-Day's on TV or not, I'm just glad I think it's going to exist, and I'm happy about that. So it's a fun time to be a sports fan, and hope you're enjoying it. We appreciate you allowing us to be part of it with you. And I do truly mean that. I really, really do, more so than you'll ever know. So check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price promised. That's important. Think about plumbing emergencies. One of the biggest ones, what if your water heater goes out? Eventually it probably will. What do you do? Well, our friends at RS Andrews can get that thing replaced for you the same day. You want to talk about being the hero in your home? Water heater goes out. Let me reach out to RS Andrews. Let me get him over here. Boom. You're back to taking a hot shower again before the night is even done. Online, rsandrews.com. Have a great day. Back Monday. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We'll look forward to talking to you then.